from lovely ingredients because I wanted something more special than the usual breakfast. At our house, we have two types of breakfasts on the regular. One we call the standard breakfast, and that is where everyone prepares their own fruit bowl, and then one that we call the fancy breakfast, and that is where mother makes something that is a little more detailed or in depth for everyone. Now, fancy breakfast, yes, of course, can be prepared by other children as they become more adept at cooking, not cleaning. We hope they become adept at cleaning at the same time, though, because otherwise making fancy breakfast can make a real mess of your kitchen. So it's nice if they have the cleaning skills to go with cooking skills. But it has been my experience that the cooking skills come first. Children are much more interested in making things than they are cleaning up after them. At least my children. Perhaps your children are different. Anyway, so what we do at our house are these two standard breakfasts, but today I really wanted something out of the ordinary, something special. So today I am creating what we call nun puffs. It's a recipe that I actually found in the Red Plaid Better Homes and Gardens cookbook and modified to make it a little more health friendly. It's something akin to a German pancake or a popover, somewhere in between, but it actually requires the making of a choux pastry before you put it into the muffin tins. So it makes individual treats, individual breakfast items. A nun puff is a very unique thing, like I said, somewhere between a German pancake and a popover. But the choux pastry gives it a nice texture. Now, if you're not familiar with choux pastry, it's where the flour and butter are cooked on the stovetop in a saucepan for a short period of time until they form it's like a Play-Doh consistency. And then the eggs are whipped into the batter before it's put into the tin. So it's a pre-cooked dough. It just changes the texture up a bit. It's quite nice. If you've ever had a cream puff, that would be made from choux pastry. So, or an eclair, a true eclair, not a gas station eclair, but a true French eclair will be made from choux pastry. So I made the choux pastry. It's a little bit more intense than this whipping up German pancakes, which all go together very nicely in a blender. This does require milk in order to get the pastry to puff. And as I am not a fan of using dairy milk, what I did instead is I made an almond milk. And it has been my experience that if you want something to puff, like a German pancake, a Dutch baby, a nun puff, or a popover, and you do not have dairy milk or are not using dairy milk, then you need to have some source of protein in the milk that you are using as an alternative in order to get the puffing action to take place. Store-bought almond milk will not do the job, okay? So you have to make a homemade almond milk, which of course will have the protein in it from the actual nuts. Store-bought almond milk, they strain that out so you don't get any kind of puffing effect. And so when I make a homemade almond milk, what I will do is I will blend it as long as possible without heating it, because if you blend something too long, yes, it will get hot. Anyway, so I blend it as long as I can without heating it in a small amount of water to really pulverize the nuts down to a very, very fine consistency. And I leave them in. I do not strain them out because those protein fibers and strands are required in order to get your finished product to actually puff. So after I made the homemade almond milk, I did that while the choux pastry was cooling. Once you mix the butter and flour together, it has to cool for about 5 minutes before you can add the eggs. Oh, I'm going out of order. Nope, I had to make the milk first because you have to boil the milk with the flour. My bad. I made the milk and then I poured it into the melted butter, and I brought that to a boil, and then added the flour and cooked that and stirred it until it became one homogeneous mass. In my son's instructions, it says cook and stir until it becomes a ball and no butter tries to escape. And that's just the consistency you're looking for, because if the butter is still melting and trying to escape, you will not have a good cohesive choux pastry. And I like to mention the fact that I'm using my son's recipe because he has mastered the art of making nun puffs. He doesn't wish to do so anymore, however, because he considers this recipe to be a little too intense, which I can empathize with, because when you're a boy and you have things to do, a lot of times you have too much to do. But I do, when I take a recipe and teach it to my children, I do write out the steps as you go, instead of writing all the ingredients and then writing all the steps like traditional recipe format. Instead, I just put steps in order that have recipe, or that have amounts and ingredients included in the steps, because it makes it a lot easier for a child and myself to follow a recipe if it is just in those steps and orders, and I don't have to keep flip-flopping back and forth between instructions and recipes. Anyway, so it is simple enough for a boy of 10 to accomplish, which he did when he was 10, and I have a lovely little picture of him with his tray of nun puffs on the recipe that I created itself. And I will put a link to that recipe that I created for him with the step-by-step instructions over the two-sided instructions, which I do not care for, the traditional recipe instructions. I'll put a link to that down in the description box after the podcast, and I hope that you try these and enjoy.